Secret Doctrine. Uncovering the lost wisdom of Atlantis and Lemuria. Imagine a world losing its faith. An age of steam and steel, of science and certainty, that had successfully mapped the globe, but was beginning to suspect it had lost its soul. Into this world, a spiritual vacuum, walked one of the most extraordinary and controversial figures in modern history. She was a Russian aristocrat who claimed to have traveled the world, studying in the secret libraries of the Himalayas. She was a chain-smoking, plain-speaking, larger-than-life woman who could, it was said, conjure phantom bells from thin air and receive letters that precipitated from the ceiling. She claimed not to be a prophet with a new religion, but a messenger, sent to remind a forgetful world of a single universal truth, an ancient wisdom that lay hidden at the heart of every great faith and philosophy the world had ever known. She called her system theosophy. Her name was Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Was she a genuine mystic, a conduit for beings of immense wisdom? Was she a brilliant, charismatic charlatan who perpetrated one of the greatest hoaxes of all time? Or was she something else entirely, a flawed and contradictory genius whose ideas would ignite a spiritual revolution and lay the groundwork for the new age? This is the story of Madame Blavatsky and the global search for a secret wisdom. To understand the birth of a revolution, you must first feel the tension that preceded it. To comprehend the explosive arrival of a new spiritual vision, you must first walk the streets of the world that was starving for one. Our story begins not in a hidden monastery or an ancient temple, but in the bustling, smoke-filled, and supremely confident heart of the late 19th century. This was an age that believed it had solved the great riddles of the universe. An age of science, of industry, of empire. An age that was about to discover that, in answering every question about the material world, it had created a new and terrifying void in the human spirit. This was the Victorian era at its zenith. The world, particularly the Western world, had been remade. The Industrial Revolution had transformed society, emptying the countryside and building vast, new cities of unprecedented size and energy. The British Empire, a sprawling global network of commerce and control, had painted a quarter of the world map red. New technologies were collapsing time and distance. The telegraph could send a message across a continent in an instant. The railway could transport a person faster than a galloping horse. The photograph could capture a moment of reality and hold it still forever. This was an age of triumphant materialism, not just in its factories, but in its philosophy. Science had become the new, undisputed arbiter of truth, and its revelations were shaking the very foundations of Western identity. For nearly 2 millennia, the Western worldview had been anchored by the narrative of the Christian Bible. It was a story that gave humanity a central, starring role in a divine drama. The universe was young, created just a few thousand years before. The earth was its center, and humanity was God's special creation, made in his image, fallen, but with a clear path to redemption. It was a story that gave meaning to suffering, a promise of eternal life, and a clear moral framework for existence. In the space of a single generation, this story was shattered. Geologists like Charles Lyell, studying the slow, inexorable processes of erosion and sedimentation, revealed that the Earth was not thousands but millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of years old. Astronomers, peering through ever more powerful telescopes, had displaced the Earth from the center of creation, revealing it to be a small planet orbiting a mediocre star in an incomprehensibly vast and ancient cosmos. But the most devastating blow came from the quiet, meticulous work of a gentle English naturalist. In 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species. His theory of evolution by natural selection presented a powerful, evidence-based alternative to the story of divine creation. Humanity, Darwin argued, was not a separate, special creation. We were a product of the same blind, material forces that had shaped every other living thing. We were descended from ape-like ancestors, one branch on a vast and complex tree of life, our existence a result of chance mutation and the brutal, immoral struggle for survival. The implications were staggering. If the Bible was wrong about the age of the earth and the origin of humanity, what else was it wrong about? The story that had provided meaning and purpose for centuries was now seen by many intellectuals not as divine revelation, but as a collection of ancient myths and fables. For the intellectual and artistic classes of Europe and America, this was a moment of profound crisis. It was a spiritual earthquake. The universe, which had once been a home built for humanity by a loving father, now felt like a cold, empty, and indifferent machine. The French mathematician Pierre-Simon Laplace, when asked by Napoleon where God fit into his model of the solar system, had famously replied, "Sire, I have no need of that hypothesis." This was the new worldview of scientific materialism. Reality was composed only of matter and energy, governed by impersonal physical laws. There was no soul, no spirit, no divine purpose. Consciousness itself was merely a chemical reaction in the brain, an epiphenomenon that would be extinguished at the moment of physical death. This worldview, while intellectually powerful, was emotionally devastating for many. It created a world that was explained, but also disenchanted. The magic was gone. The great Victorian poet Matthew Arnold captured this sense of loss in his poem Dover Beach, imagining the sea of faith, once at the full, now making a melancholy, long, withdrawing roar. The poet Alfred Tennyson wrestled with the same anxiety, crying out against a nature that seemed red in tooth and claw, a world where 50 million years of evolution could result in beings who live for a moment, only to be turned to dust. If this was all there was, then what was the point of art, of love, of morality? If the universe was meaningless, then so were human lives. This was the great, unspoken spiritual anxiety of the late 19th century, and it created a deep, powerful, and desperate hunger for answers. The human spirit, it seems, cannot long endure a vacuum of meaning. As the authority of the established churches waned, a chaotic, vibrant, and deeply strange spiritual marketplace sprang up to take its place. People began searching for a new kind of religion, one that could honor the discoveries of science while still making room for the soul. They were searching for a faith based not on ancient authority, but on direct, personal, scientific experience. The first and most popular of these new movements was spiritualism. Born in America, it swept across the globe like a wildfire. Its promise was electrifying. You did not have to take the existence of the afterlife on faith. You could prove it empirically in your own drawing room. Through mediums who claimed to channel the spirits of the dead, millions sought contact with their departed loved ones. The phenomena of the seance room, the rapping tables, the floating trumpets, the ghostly apparitions formed from a strange substance called ectoplasm were offered as repeatable, observable evidence that the human personality survived the death of the anism. It was a perfectly tailored religion for a scientific age, offering tangible proof to a generation that had been taught to trust only what it could see and measure. It brought immense comfort to the grieving and provided a powerful counter-argument to the bleak finality of scientific materialism. Alongside spiritualism, there was a renewed interest in older, more obscure forms of Western thought. The secret sciences of the past, alchemy, astrology, the Kabbalah, were rediscovered, not as primitive superstitions, but as sophisticated systems of psychological and spiritual development. Secret societies like Freemasonry, with their ancient rituals and symbolic language, flourished, offering a sense of history, brotherhood, and connection to a hidden tradition. This period was a whirlwind of spiritual experimentation. There was a fascination with mesmerism and hypnotism, which seemed to reveal the hidden depths and untapped powers of the human mind. There was an explosion of interest in the religions and philosophies of the East. Buddhism, Hinduism, the Upanishads, whose ancient texts were being translated and published in Europe for the first time, offering a vast, new spiritual vocabulary. It was a time of immense spiritual ferment, of searching, of profound yearning. The world was awash in ghosts, in new theories, in rediscovered ancient texts, but it was all chaotic, fragmented, and often contradictory. Spiritualism offered proof of survival, but its messages from the beyond often seemed banal and disappointing. The ancient texts were profound, but dense and difficult to understand. Freemasonry offered ritual, but its deeper meaning had, for many, been lost. The world was waiting for a synthesizer, a mind vast and bold enough to take all these scattered pieces, the scientific spirit of the age, the phenomena of spiritualism, the ancient wisdom of the East, the secret traditions of the West, and forge them into a single, grand, all-encompassing system. A system that could challenge both the dogmatic minister in his pulpit and the materialist scientist in his laboratory. The spiritual hunger was at its peak. The stage was set. All that was needed was a messenger, a charismatic figure who could claim to have the key, the secret doctrine that would unlock all mysteries. And that messenger was about to arrive on the shores of America. A woman as complex, as contradictory, and as larger than life as the age itself. A Russian aristocrat who would claim to be the agent of hidden masters, and whose name would become synonymous with the search for secret wisdom. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Into this world of spiritual hunger and intellectual crisis stepped a figure as complex and formidable as the age itself. She was not a demure Victorian prophetess or a stern New England preacher. She was a force of nature, a blizzard from the Russian steppes, a woman who seemed to contain all the contradictions of her time within her own singular personality. She was, and remains, a historical enigma, a Russian sphinx whose life story is a tantalizing puzzle box of fact, fiction, and outright fantasy. Her name was Helena Petrovna von Hahn, but history would come to know her by her married name, Madame Blavatsky. She was born in 1831 in Ekaterinoslav in what is now Ukraine, then a provincial town in the vast Russian Empire. She was a child of aristocracy, a scion of two noble families. Her mother was a celebrated novelist, her grandmother a princess and a gifted amateur scientist. From the very beginning, she was surrounded by a world of privilege, intellect, and deep-seated Russian mysticism. The stories of her childhood, mostly told by herself and her family years later, paint a picture of a strange, willful, and profoundly psychic child. She was not like other children. She was a sleepwalker, a storyteller, a girl who claimed to have invisible companions and an uncanny connection to the hidden worlds of folklore and spirit. The serfs on her family's estate believed she had the power of the evil eye. She was said to be able to command the elements, to hear thoughts, and to see the spirits of the dead. She was, by her own account, a born occultist, living with one foot in the mundane world and one in a realm of myth and magic. Her rebellion against the conventional world began early. At the age of just 17, in an act of pure defiance against her governess who had taunted her that no man would ever marry her, she agreed to wed Nikifor Blavatsky, a provincial vice-governor more than 20 years her senior. The marriage was an immediate and unmitigated disaster. By her own famous and adamant account, the union was never consummated. She found her husband physically repulsive and the constraints of married life intolerable. After a few short, miserable months, she did something almost unthinkable for a woman of her class and time. She fled. She abandoned her husband, her family, and her life as a Russian noblewoman, and embarked on a journey that would last for more than 2 decades. These next 20 years, from roughly 1849 to the early 1870s, are what historians call her lost years or her years of travel. They are the core of her personal mythos, a period of her life that is almost impossible to verify, relying almost entirely on her own, often contradictory and fantastical, accounts. Her stories from this time are a whirlwind of high adventure, a picaresque novel come to life. If even a fraction of them are true, she lived a dozen lifetimes before she ever began her public mission. She claimed to have traveled the globe. She went to Constantinople, a crossroads of East and West, and then to Egypt, where she said she studied with a Coptic magician and tried, and failed, to form her own esoteric society in Cairo. She claimed to have traveled through the Balkans and Central Europe. In Paris, she supposedly associated with famous spiritualists and mesmerists. In London, she met the thinkers and radicals of the day. Her tales grew wilder. She recounted stories of fighting alongside the Italian revolutionary Giuseppe Garibaldi at the Battle of Mentana, where she was left for dead, riddled with musket balls and stab wounds, only to be miraculously healed. She claimed to have been a concert pianist, a professional musician, and even, for a time, a bareback rider in a circus. Her alleged travels took her across the Atlantic. She claimed to have crossed the American plains in a covered wagon during the days of the Wild West, and to have traveled through Texas, Mexico, and South America, searching for the traces of ancient civilizations. She was a lone woman, traveling through some of the most dangerous and remote parts of the world, driven by a relentless and insatiable curiosity. But all these worldly adventures were, in her telling, merely a prelude. They were the outer journey that was preparing her for the true, inner quest. All along, she claimed she was being guided. She was in psychic contact with a hidden brotherhood of spiritual masters, who were leading her, testing her, and preparing her for her ultimate destination. A place that, to the 19th century Western mind, was not a real geographical location, but a landscape of pure myth and legend. Tibet. Tibet, the rooftop of the world. In the Victorian imagination, it was the ultimate inaccessible land, a place shrouded in mystery, the rumored home of a lost, magical wisdom. And it was here, Blavatsky claimed, that she finally found the source of her knowledge. She alleged that she made several attempts to enter the forbidden country, and finally succeeded. For 7 years, she said, she lived and studied there in a secret region called Shagatz. She was taken in by her own personal teacher, the Master Morya, and his close associate, the Master Kuthumi. These masters, or Mahatmas, were the central figures in her cosmology. They were not gods or angels or disembodied spirits. They were, she insisted, living human beings, men who, through countless lifetimes of spiritual discipline and evolution, had attained a state of perfection. They had transcended the limitations of ordinary humanity, possessing vast knowledge and incredible psychic powers, including the ability to communicate telepathically and project their astral bodies across great distances. These Mahatmas, she said, formed a great white brotherhood, a secret lodge of adepts who have watched over and guided the spiritual evolution of humanity for eons. They were the silent guardians of the ancient wisdom, the single universal truth that is the esoteric heart of every great religion the world has ever known. This wisdom, she claimed, was preserved in a vast, hidden library, in a language unknown to modern philology. It was her mission, she was told, to return to the outer world and present a small fragment of this secret doctrine to a spiritually bankrupt West. This is the story she told. This is the myth she created around herself. How much of it can we believe? Skeptical biographers have pointed out the complete lack of any independent evidence for her travels in Tibet. They note that her accounts are filled with contradictions and change over time. They suggest that she likely spent these years in a much more mundane fashion, perhaps living in Europe with a series of lovers, and that the story of the Tibetan masters was a brilliant fiction, a romantic invention designed to give her teachings an unassailable mystical authority. Her defenders, in contrast, argue that a lack of conventional proof is to be expected for such an esoteric journey. They point to the sheer depth and complexity of her later writings as evidence that she must have had access to some extraordinary source of knowledge. Perhaps the literal truth of her travels is beside the point. Whether she physically went to Tibet or not, she had clearly undertaken a profound inner journey. Whether the masters were living men in the Himalayas or archetypal forces within her own psyche, they were real to her, and they became real for her followers. Her life story was her first great teaching, a demonstration of a life lived in defiance of convention, in pursuit of a hidden, universal truth. In 1873, this human puzzle box, this Russian sphinx, now in her early 40s, arrived in New York City. She was a woman hardened by decades of travel, a formidable figure who chain-smoked constantly, swore like a soldier, and could hold a room of skeptical journalists and intellectuals spellbound for hours with her brilliant conversation, her encyclopedic knowledge of obscure lore, and her endless, fascinating stories. She was no longer just a traveler. She was a messenger. And she was about to meet the partner who would help her package her strange, chaotic genius into a global spiritual movement. The search for secret wisdom was about to get organized. A vision, no matter how profound, needs a vehicle to carry it into the world. A mystic, no matter how charismatic, needs a structure to anchor their teachings. In 1873, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky arrived in New York City, a woman carrying a lifetime of esoteric secrets and a mission from her hidden masters. But she was adrift, a strange and formidable presence in a new, pragmatic world. To transform her personal mythos into a global movement, she would need a partner, a collaborator who could take her chaotic, visionary genius and give it form, purpose, and respectability. She was the mystical fire. She was about to meet the man who would build the engine. His name was Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, and on the surface, he could not have been more different from Madame Blavatsky. Where she was an enigmatic Russian aristocrat, he was a salt-of-the-earth American from New Jersey. Where her past was a shrouded mystery of world travel and occult adventure, his was a public record of unimpeachable integrity and service. Olcott was a man of immense practical ability. He was a Civil War veteran who had served with distinction, rising to the rank of colonel and working on special investigations into corruption for the War and Navy departments, earning a reputation for his meticulous honesty. After the war, he became a successful lawyer, and then a nationally recognized expert in agricultural science, publishing articles and advising on new farming techniques. He was, in short, a man of facts, of figures, of order, and of the material world. But like so many of his generation, Colonel Olcott harbored a deep private curiosity about the world beyond the five senses. The death of a beloved nephew had sparked in him a profound interest in spiritualism. He was not a credulous believer, however. He approached the phenomena of the seance room with the same methodical, investigative mind that he had applied to military fraud and scientific agriculture. He wanted proof. He wanted to understand the laws that governed these strange occurrences. In 1874, his investigation into a pair of famous spirit mediums would lead him to a fateful encounter. The location was the Eddy family farm in Chittenden, Vermont. The Eddy brothers were famous mediums who claimed to be able to produce full-form materializations of dozens of different spirits in their seance room. The case had become a media sensation, and Colonel Olcott was there as a journalist, writing a series of articles for a New York newspaper. He was impressed by the phenomena but remained a skeptical, scientific observer. And then, into this rustic, American scene of ghostly apparitions walked Madame Blavatsky. She had traveled from New York, drawn by the newspaper reports of the Eddy seances. She made an immediate and unforgettable impression. She was a large woman dressed in a striking red Garibaldi shirt, chain-smoking hand-rolled cigarettes, and speaking with a thick Russian accent. She did not behave like the other spiritualists. While they sat in reverent awe, she was often dismissive, even contemptuous. She declared many of the spirit manifestations to be nothing more than the empty shells of the dead, or sometimes, simple frauds. Yet, she also claimed to have a deeper understanding of the true, hidden laws that made genuine phenomena possible. She spoke of elemental spirits, of astral projection, of a secret science of the soul that was far more ancient and profound than the simplistic theories of the spiritualists. Olcott was utterly captivated. Here was a woman who was not a passive channel, but a master of the subject. She possessed a philosophical depth and a worldly knowledge that he had never encountered. He wrote in his diary that he felt an immediate, powerful connection to her, a sense of having known her before. They began a correspondence and a partnership was forged. She was the teacher with the secret knowledge. He was the diligent student and the practical man of action. The two pillars of a new society had found each other. They returned to New York, and Blavatsky's apartment at 46 Irving Place became the hub for a circle of curious seekers. It was a place of intellectual ferment. The evenings were filled with Blavatsky's spellbinding lectures. She would hold court for hours, smoking incessantly, her powerful voice filling the room as she discoursed on the lost wisdom of Plato, the mysteries of the Kabbalah, the magic of the ancient Egyptians, and her own adventures in the far corners of the earth. The group that gathered around her was a diverse collection of intellectuals, spiritualists, Freemasons, and simply curious minds. One of the most important was William Quan Judge, a young, earnest Irish-American lawyer who would become the third key figure in the society's founding. On the evening of September 7, 1875, the group was listening to a lecture on the secret geometry of the ancient Egyptians. A wave of excitement and purpose filled the room. Someone suggested that they should form a society to pursue these studies in a more formal way. Colonel Olcott, the man of action, immediately took charge. He took a piece of paper and drafted a proposal. A society would be formed for the study and elucidation of the occult. 16 people present that night signed on. A few days later, they met again to choose a name. Various suggestions were made, but it was Blavatsky who, after searching through a dictionary, proposed the perfect word, theosophy. The term was not new. It came from the Greek theos, meaning God or divine, and Sophia, meaning wisdom. It had been used for centuries by mystics like Jacob Boehme to describe a direct, intuitive knowledge of the divine. But Blavatsky and her circle would give it a new, modern meaning. Theosophy would be the divine wisdom as a unified system, the ancient truth that was the secret, esoteric heart of all religions. The Theosophical Society was officially founded in November of 1875. Olcott was elected president for life, providing the respectable administrative face of the organization. Blavatsky was made the corresponding secretary, the true spiritual engine and source of its teachings. And its mission was crystallized into 3 official objects. First, to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. In the deeply prejudiced world of the 19th century, this was a profoundly radical and progressive statement. Second, to encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science, with the aim of uncovering the universal ethics and truths that bound them all together. And the third, most controversial object, to investigate the unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in man. This was the call to explore the world of psychic phenomena, of magic, of the hidden potential of human consciousness. The new society needed a foundational text, a manifesto that would lay out its worldview. And so, Madame Blavatsky embarked on the monumental task of writing her first great work. For 2 years, she worked obsessively, often writing for more than 14 hours a day, chain-smoking and fueled by endless cups of coffee. The result, published in 1877, was Isis Unveiled, a master key to the mysteries of ancient and modern science and theology. The book was a behemoth, a sprawling, chaotic, 2-volume work of over 1,000 pages. It was less a structured argument and more a literary explosion. It was a ferocious, 2-pronged attack on what Blavatsky saw as the twin pillars of ignorance in her age: dogmatic, institutional religion on one hand, and arrogant, materialistic science on the other. She accused the Christian Church of having corrupted the original, pure teachings of Jesus, burying them under centuries of dogma and political power plays. And she accused modern science of a profound and willful blindness, of refusing to investigate any phenomenon that did not fit its narrow, materialistic worldview. Against these two foes, she marshaled a vast, dizzying, and often uncited array of sources: the philosophy of Plato, the magic of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the mysticism of the Kabbalah, the teachings of the Gnostics, the latest theories on electricity and magnetism, and reports from spiritualist seances. She wove it all together into a grand, overarching narrative. The story of a single, universal ancient wisdom, a secret doctrine that had been known to the initiates of every great civilization, from Atlantis to Egypt to India, and which she was now, for the first time, unveiling to the modern world. Isis Unveiled was not an easy read. It was dense, digressive, and filled with long, unattributed quotations. Critics immediately pounced on it for its apparent plagiarism and its wild, unsubstantiated claims. But for a public hungry for spiritual answers, it was a revelation. The book was a sensation, selling out its first printing in just 10 days. It announced the arrival of a major new voice and put the Theosophical Society on the map. A society had been born. A doctrine had been declared. The search for secret wisdom now had a formal structure and a foundational text. The next step was to take the message to the world, and specifically, to the place Blavatsky claimed was the original source of her wisdom, the ancient sacred land of India. Every great spiritual system has its sacred text, a Bible, a Quran, a sutra, a book that claims to lay out the very architecture of the cosmos and humanity's place within it. For Theosophy, that book would be one of the most ambitious, most complex, and most controversial spiritual works ever written. It was Madame Blavatsky's magnum opus, the culmination of her life's work. Published in 1888, its title was a bold and provocative claim. The Secret Doctrine, the synthesis of science, religion, and philosophy. This was not just a sequel to her first book, Isis Unveiled. It was a quantum leap in scope and complexity. It was her attempt to provide nothing less than a complete history of the universe, from its first stirrings in the cosmic dawn to its ultimate dissolution, and to map humanity's epic, multi-million-year journey of spiritual evolution. It was, she claimed, a small fragment of the one true universal wisdom that had been secretly guarded for eons. Blavatsky was adamant that this monumental work was not her own creation. She presented herself not as an author, but as an amanuensis, a scribe taking dictation from a higher source. She claimed that the true authors were her hidden masters, the Mahatmas Kuthumi and Maurya, who psychically impressed the ideas upon her mind. She wrote that when she was unsure of a fact or a quotation, she had only to focus her inner vision, and an astral projection of the required book or manuscript page would appear before her. The ultimate source text, she alleged, was something far more ancient and mysterious. The Book of Zion. She described this as a manuscript of unimaginable antiquity, written in a lost pre-Sanskrit language called Senzur, on pages made from a substance that was impervious to water, fire, and air. She claimed to have seen this book in the hidden library of her masters during her time in Tibet, and that the core of the Secret Doctrine was her commentary on a small number of its cryptic, poetic stanzas. No one, of course, has ever seen the Book of Zion. For skeptics, it is the ultimate literary device, a convenient, unverifiable source that allowed Blavatsky to present her own grand synthesis as an ancient revelation. For believers, it is the lost Bible of humanity, a genuine text whose existence cannot be proven by ordinary means. So what is the secret doctrine that the book reveals? It begins with three fundamental propositions, the pillars upon which the entire system rests. First, there is one absolute, unknowable reality. It is beyond all thought and speculation. It is beingness rather than being, a boundless, eternal, and immutable principle. It is the uncaused cause of all that is, was, or ever shall be. Second, the universe is eternal, but it appears and disappears in vast, immense cycles of manifestation and dissolution, known as manvantaras and pralayas. Like the rhythmic outbreathing and inbreathing of the cosmos, worlds are periodically created, evolve over eons, and are then withdrawn back into the one source, only to re-emerge again in a new cycle. Third, every soul is identical with this universal soul and is on a mandatory pilgrimage of evolution. Every single unit of consciousness, from a speck of dust to a human being, is on an epic journey through the cycles of incarnation, gradually unfolding its latent divine potential over an almost unimaginable timescale. From these three fundamentals, the book unfolds its vast and intricate history of cosmic and human evolution. It is a story told on a scale that dwarfs the biblical narrative, a vision of deep time and cosmic purpose. Perhaps the most famous and most challenging component of the secret doctrine is its theory of human evolution through a series of 7 root races. This is not evolution in the Darwinian sense. It is a preordained spiritual and physical journey. Theosophy teaches that our Earth is part of a chain of 7 globes, through which the great wave of life must pass 7 times. We are currently in the 4th round on the 4th globe, Earth. In each round, humanity evolves through 7 great root races. These are not races in the modern ethnic sense. They are vast, distinct epochs of human development, each lasting for millions of years, each inhabiting its own continental system, and each with a very different physical form and state of consciousness. The first root race, she wrote, was purely ethereal and non-physical, living on a sacred, imperishable land. The second root race was more defined but still non-physical, living on a great northern continent called Hyperborea. The third root race was the first to become fully physical. They were giants, living on a vast Pacific continent she called Lemuria. It was during this race, she claimed, that the separation of the sexes occurred and the spark of mind was awakened in humanity by higher spiritual beings. The fourth root race was the civilization of Atlantis. The Atlanteans, she wrote, developed great and powerful civilizations, but they were also the race where humanity fell into materialism and black magic, leading to the eventual cataclysmic sinking of their continent. Our current humanity, she taught, constitutes the fifth root race, the Aryan racia term she used in its original Sanskrit sense, meaning noble, not in the later corrupted racial sense. The fifth race's destiny is to develop the faculty of intellect. And it too, she predicted, will eventually be superseded by a more spiritual sixth and seventh root race in the far distant future. This doctrine of root races and lost continents, while fascinating to her followers, has become the most problematic part of her legacy. Although Blavatsky presented it as a universal story of the soul's journey, her use of hierarchical language and terms like Aryan would later be co-opted and hideously distorted by racist ideologies like Aryosophy and Nazism, which used her ideas to justify their horrific theories of racial supremacy, a perversion of her work that she could not have foreseen. Woven through this grand cosmic history are the two concepts that would become Theosophy's most enduring and influential contribution to Western thought: karma and reincarnation. While these ideas were ancient in the East, for the majority of the 19th century West, they were a profound revelation. Blavatsky introduced the idea that the true human self is not the fleeting personality, but an immortal, divine spark, the Atma Buddhimanas. This higher self, she taught, reincarnates. It passes through countless lifetimes on Earth, experiencing life as a man, a woman, in every race, culture, and social condition. The purpose of this long pilgrimage is experience, learning, and evolution. And the law that governs this journey is karma. Karma, from the Sanskrit word for action, is the universal law of ethical cause and effect. It is not a system of reward and punishment from an external god. It is an impersonal, unerring law of cosmic balance. Every thought, word, and deed creates a cause, an energy that will inevitably ripple back to the Creator as a corresponding effect, either in this life or in a future one. This doctrine offered a powerful solution to the age-old problem of evil and suffering. Why do good people suffer while the wicked prosper? In the theosophical view, it is the working out of karmic debts incurred in past lives. There is no injustice in the universe. We are each, in every moment, living with the consequences of our own past actions, and simultaneously creating the causes that will shape our future. This vision placed the responsibility for human destiny squarely on human shoulders. We are not the helpless subjects of a capricious God or a meaningless universe. We are the architects of our own salvation, the masters of our own fate, slowly, over millions of years, evolving back to the divine source from which we came. The secret doctrine was Blavatsky's ultimate statement. It was a declaration of war on the limitations of both science and religion. It offered a vision of a purposeful cosmos, a meaningful human journey, and a hidden history of the world. It was a book that was revered by its followers as a divine revelation, and dismissed by its critics as a monstrous, plagiarized fantasy. But whatever its origin, its impact was undeniable. It provided the intellectual and spiritual foundation for a movement that was about to spread across the globe. The secret doctrine was now public. The question was, could its messenger provide proof? A doctrine, no matter how profound, is still just a theory. A book, no matter how monumental, is still just words on a page. The Theosophical Society, with its grand claims of hidden masters and a secret history of the world, had captured the imagination of many. But for it to truly take root, it needed more than just ideas. It needed proof. It needed a sign, a tangible link between this world and the mysterious, otherworldly realm of the Mahatmas. In 1879, Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott made a pivotal decision. They moved the international headquarters of the Theosophical Society from New York to India. It was a symbolic and strategic masterstroke. By relocating to the land they considered to be the living heart of the ancient wisdom, they were bringing their mission home. They eventually settled in Udyar, a suburb of Madras, on a sprawling estate that would become the Society's permanent global nerve center. It was here, in the charged, spiritual atmosphere of India, that the Theosophical movement exploded in popularity, attracting both native Indian intellectuals and curious British colonial officials. And it was here that the most famous, most baffling, and most intensely controversial events in the Society's history would unfold. The whispers from the Himalayas were about to become much, much louder. The key figures in this new drama were not Blavatsky and Olcott, but two high-ranking and highly intelligent members of the British colonial establishment. The first was Alfred Percy Sinnett, the influential editor of The Pioneer, the most powerful English-language newspaper in India. The second was Alan Octavian Hume, a retired high-ranking civil servant and a respected ornithologist. Both men were brilliant, skeptical, and deeply intrigued by Blavatsky's teachings. They were willing to accept her philosophical system, but like true men of their scientific age, they wanted evidence. If these masters of wisdom were real, living men, could they not be contacted directly? Could they not provide some proof of their existence and their extraordinary powers, beyond the word of Madame Blavatsky? Blavatsky was initially reluctant. She insisted that the masters were not performers, and that communication with them was a sacred privilege, not a scientific experiment. But Sinnett and Hume were persistent, and finally, she agreed to act as their intermediary. Thus began one of the most remarkable correspondences in the history of the occult. The communication was not done through any ordinary post. It was a work of pure magic. A letter from Sinnett or Hume, addressed to the Master Kuthumi or the Master Moria, would be written and sealed. Sometimes it would be handed to Blavatsky. Other times it would simply be left in a designated shrine or a locked box. Moments or hours later, the original letter would have vanished. And the reply would arrive just as mysteriously. Sometimes a new, sealed envelope would appear as if from nowhere, fluttering down from the ceiling onto a table. Other times it would be found inside a split pillow, within the pages of a book that had just been read, or in some other impossible location. These precipitated letters were extraordinary objects. They were written on a distinctive type of paper, often with exotic watermarks, and in two very distinct styles of handwriting, refined, scholarly script for Master Kuthumi, and a bolder, more forceful script for Master Moria. The ink itself seemed unusual, appearing to be embedded in the fibers of the paper rather than written upon it. The contents of the letters were even more astonishing. They were not simple notes. They were long, detailed philosophical discourses, expanding on the teachings of theosophy, answering complex questions about science and religion, and offering glimpses into the life and perspective of the Mahatmas themselves. This correspondence, which lasted for several years, would be collected and published by Sinnett in two hugely influential books, The Occult World and, more importantly, Esoteric Buddhism. For theosophists, these Mahatma letters were sacred texts, direct communications from the hidden guides of humanity. The letter phenomena were not the only miracles on display at Udyar. The headquarters became a hotbed of supernatural activity. Visitors would report hearing the sound of faint, tinkling astral bells in the air, which Blavatsky explained was the signal used by the masters to indicate their psychic presence or to draw her attention to something. Objects would be a port dematerialized from one location and rematerialized in another. A brooch that a woman had lost miles away might suddenly fall into her lap during a conversation with Blavatsky. A teacup and saucer that had been broken might be found, moments later, perfectly restored. The centerpiece of these phenomena was a wooden cabinet in Blavatsky's rooms, known as the Shrine. It was a cabinet with two compartments, dedicated to the masters. A question might be written on a piece of paper and placed in the shrine. When the doors were opened again, the answer would be there, allegedly written by one of the Mahatmas. It was a direct line to the Himalayan Brotherhood, right there in a Madras parlor. For a time, it was a golden age for the society. The phenomena at Udyar created a tidal wave of excitement, attracting new members and generating newspaper headlines around the world. Here, it seemed, was the undeniable proof they had been searching for. But the higher an object flies, the further it has to fall. And the very phenomena that had built Blavatsky's fame were about to become the instruments of her public disgrace. The serpent in this Indian Eden came from within Blavatsky's own household. Her staff at the Udyar headquarters included a French couple, Emma and Alexis Coulomb. Emma had been a friend of Blavatsky's from her earlier days in Cairo and served as her housekeeper. Her husband, Alexis, was a carpenter and handyman. In 1884, after a series of disputes, the Coulombs were dismissed from their positions. They left Udyar, but they did not go quietly. Burning with resentment, they went to the editors of the Christian College magazine, a publication run by Protestant missionaries in Madras who were vocal opponents of theosophy. The Coulombs had a story to sell, and they had letters to back it up. They claimed that the entire array of Udyar phenomena was a massive, elaborate fraud, orchestrated by Madame Blavatsky from start to finish. They alleged that the Mahatma letters were not precipitated from the astral plane, but were written by Blavatsky herself, who would then use a variety of ingenious tricks to deliver them. They claimed the astral bells were produced by a small clockwork device. And most damningly, they alleged that the miraculous shrine was a piece of stage magic. Alexis Coulomb, the carpenter, claimed that he himself had built a series of secret panels, sliding doors, and a hole in the wall behind the shrine, allowing Blavatsky or an accomplice to secretly insert the precipitated replies. To prove their case, they produced a bundle of letters, allegedly written to them in French by Madame Blavatsky. These letters contained explicit instructions on how to construct the trick devices and how to manage the fraudulent phenomena. The scandal exploded. The missionaries published the Coulomb story and the letters, gleefully proclaiming that they had exposed theosophy as a hollow sham. The Coulomb affair was a public relations catastrophe. It threatened to sink the entire theosophical project. In London, a newly formed and highly prestigious organization, the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, decided to launch a formal investigation. The SPR was dedicated to the scientific, impartial study of psychic phenomena, and its members included some of the leading intellectuals of the day. They dispatched one of their most brilliant and tenacious young investigators to India to discover the truth. His name was Richard Hodgson. Hodgson, an Australian-born Cambridge graduate, arrived in India and threw himself into the case with immense diligence. He spent months on the ground. He interviewed the Coulombs at length. He spoke with dozens of theosophists and their critics. He examined the disputed letters, subjecting them to handwriting analysis. He traveled to Udyar to inspect the shrine and Blavatsky's rooms. His final report, published in 1885 by the SPR, was over 200 pages long, and it was an absolute bombshell. It was a systematic and utter demolition of Blavatsky's claims. Hodgson concluded that the Coulombs, while not entirely trustworthy witnesses, were telling the truth about the fraud. He concluded that the incriminating letters were indeed written by Blavatsky. His handwriting analysis asserted that she had written the Mahatma letters herself, disguising her own script to create the two distinct styles of Kut Homi and Maurya. He concluded that the phenomena of the shrine were achieved through the trick panels that Coulomb had described. His final, damning verdict became one of the most famous phrases ever written about her. He declared Madame Blavatsky to be one of the most accomplished, ingenious, and interesting impostors in history. The Hodgson report was a devastating, seemingly fatal blow. For the rest of her life and beyond, Blavatsky would be officially branded as a fraud by a respected scientific body. Her followers, of course, mounted a furious defense. They attacked Hodgson's methods, claimed he was biased from the start, and argued that he had been completely duped by the forged evidence of the vengeful Coulombs. Decades later, the SPR itself would issue statements questioning the conclusive nature of Hodgson's report. But by then, the damage had long been done. But at the time, the verdict seemed final. Blavatsky, her health shattered by the stress of the scandal, left India for the last time under a dark cloud of disgrace. To her enemies, she was a proven charlatan. But to her followers, she was a martyr, persecuted by a blind, materialistic world that was incapable of understanding her or her mission. Her great work, it seemed, was on the brink of collapse. A movement built around a single, charismatic personality faces its greatest crisis at the moment of that personality's death. For 17 years, the Theosophical Society had been powered by the turbulent, brilliant, and utterly irreplaceable energy of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. She had been its oracle, its chief strategist, its lightning rod for controversy, and the living link to its hidden masters. On May 8, 1891, in London, that living link was broken. Madame Blavatsky died at the age of 59. Her passing left a profound and immediate void at the heart of the movement she had created. Her followers were grief-stricken, but they were also faced with a daunting and dangerous question. Who would lead them now? Who could possibly fill the shoes of HPB? The society she had built was now a global phenomenon, with branches across Europe, America, and Asia. But it was a fellowship held together by a shared devotion to a single woman. With her gone, the latent rivalries, the differing interpretations, and the personal ambitions of her chosen disciples would rise to the surface. The Universal Brotherhood was about to face its first great test, a test that would pit its most brilliant minds against each other and threaten to shatter the entire edifice. The battle for Blavatsky's mantle had begun. Two figures emerged as the most likely successors, two of Blavatsky's most trusted and talented lieutenants. They were, in many ways, natural rivals, representing two different faces of the Theosophical movement. The first was William Quan Judge, an Irish-American lawyer. Judge had been there from the very beginning. He was one of the three principal founders of the society alongside Blavatsky and Alcott in that New York apartment back in 1875. He was fiercely loyal to Blavatsky's original vision and had worked tirelessly to build the American section of the society into its largest and most dynamic branch. Judge was a man of quiet intensity, a devoted mystic who believed deeply in the reality of the masters and claimed to have his own, independent psychic connection to them, a connection that predated even his meeting with Blavatsky. For many American theosophists, he was the natural heir. The second contender was a more recent but far more famous convert, Annie Besant. Besant was one of the most extraordinary women of the Victorian age. Before discovering theosophy, she had been a national figure in Britain, a radical social reformer, a champion of birth control and women's rights, a fiery socialist, and a celebrated atheist orator. She was a woman of immense intellect, unshakable courage, and perhaps the most powerful and persuasive public speaker in England. In 1889, after being asked to review the secret doctrine, she had a profound conversion experience. She renounced her atheism and embraced theosophy with all the passionate zeal she had once reserved for social reform. She quickly became Blavatsky's closest confidant and chosen protégé during her final years in London. When Blavatsky died, many saw Besant, with her fame, her intellect, and her powerful charisma, as the public voice that could carry the movement into the future. In the immediate aftermath of Blavatsky's death, a fragile peace was maintained. The leadership was shared between Colonel Alcott, the Society's aging president in India, and the two rising stars, Judge in America and Besant in Europe. They formed a triumvirate, promising to work together to preserve their founder's legacy. But a fundamental and dangerous question lay just beneath the surface, a question that would ultimately tear them apart. Who now spoke for the masters? The authority of the Theosophical Society had always rested on the claim of direct communication with the hidden Mahatmas. Blavatsky had been the sole, authenticated channel. With her gone, was the line to the masters now dead? Or had they chosen a new messenger? This question became the focus of an intense internal power struggle. Both Annie Besant and William Judge soon began to claim that they were receiving their own messages and instructions from the Mahatmas. Suddenly, there were two competing channels, two rival oracles, issuing guidance that was not always in alignment. The potential for conflict was immense. The crisis erupted in 1894. The flashpoint was a series of messages, purportedly from Master Moria, that William Judge had presented to other members. These messages consistently supported Judge's own policies and reinforced his authority within the society. Annie Besant, along with Colonel Olcott, became deeply suspicious. They began to suspect that Judge was not receiving genuine messages, but was faking them. They alleged that he was fraudulently precipitating letters, imitating the distinctive handwriting of the masters to produce convenient endorsements for his own agenda. It was a shocking accusation, one that struck at the very heart of the society's spiritual claims. It was, in essence, an echo of the Coulomb affair that had plagued Blavatsky a decade earlier, but this time the accuser and the accused were the two most powerful figures in the movement. Besant, a woman of uncompromising moral conviction, felt she had no choice but to act. She and Olcott brought formal charges against Judge, accusing him of misuse of the Mahatmas' names and handwriting. The Judge case, as it became known, threw the entire international society into turmoil. A judicial committee was formed to investigate the charges. The proceedings were agonizing, a public airing of the society's most painful internal divisions. Judge vehemently denied the accusations, insisting that his communications from the masters were genuine. His supporters in the American section rallied fiercely around him, seeing the charges as a politically motivated attack by the European and Indian branches, an attempt by Besant and Olcott to centralize power and marginalize their American rival. The situation was a spiritual and legal minefield. How could a committee possibly rule on the authenticity of a psychically precipitated letter? How could they prove or disprove a claim of contact with a hidden master? Colonel Olcott, as president, found himself in an impossible position. He ultimately ruled that he had no jurisdiction to proceed. He declared that the society could not put a member on trial for claiming to receive messages from the masters, as the existence of the masters themselves was a matter of personal belief, not organizational dogma. He dismissed the case on a technicality. But the damage was done. The dismissal did not exonerate Judge in the eyes of his accusers, nor did it heal the profound breach of trust. The fellowship was broken beyond repair. The American section, feeling that their leader had been unjustly persecuted, decided to take a drastic step. At their annual convention in Boston in April of 1895, under the leadership of William Quan Judge, they voted overwhelmingly to secede. They declared their complete autonomy from Colonel Olcott and the Udyar headquarters. The Theosophical Society in America was now its own independent organization. The international movement was officially shattered. There were now two major Theosophical Societies: the original Udyar-based society, led by Olcott and Besant, which retained control of the European and Indian sections, and the new Independent American Society, led by Judge. Each claimed to be the true inheritor of Blavatsky's mission. Each claimed the allegiance of the masters. The tragedy was compounded by the death of William Quan Judge just a year later, in 1896. At the young age of 44. His passing left the newly independent American society to splinter further into various competing factions. The dream of a universal brotherhood, the first and most sacred object of the society, had collapsed into a very human story of jealousy, ambition, and schism. The fellowship, forged in the fire of a shared mystical quest, had been broken on the anvil of human politics. It was a bitter end to the society's first chapter. But the ideas that Blavatsky had unleashed were now too powerful to be contained by any single organization. The river, having been dammed and divided, was about to overflow its banks and spread in 1,000 different directions. When a great river reaches the sea, it fractures. It breaks apart into 1,000 streams, fanning out to create a fertile delta, rich with new life. The Theosophical Society, in the wake of its founder's death and its own internal schism, did much the same. The dream of a single, unified universal brotherhood was broken. But the ideas that Blavatsky had unleashed, the powerful concepts of karma and reincarnation, the belief in hidden masters, the vision of a universal ancient wisdom could not be contained. The river of theosophy now flowed out into the wider culture, its waters mingling with politics, religion, art, and literature. Its influence would become so pervasive, so deeply absorbed into the spiritual and intellectual soil of the 20th century, that we often fail to recognize its source. The legacy of the Theosophical Society is not the society itself, but the thousand streams that flowed from it. After the schism, the Udyar-based Theosophical Society, under the powerful new leadership of Annie Besant, entered a new and dynamic phase. Besant, with her immense oratorical gifts and political experience, steered the society in a more activist direction. She moved to India and became a fierce advocate for Indian self-rule, serving as a president of the Indian National Congress and helping to found the Banaras Hindu University. For Besant, theosophy was not just a spiritual philosophy. It was a mandate to work for the betterment of humanity in the material world. But it was her collaboration with another prominent theosophist, the clairvoyant C.W. Leadbeater, that would lead to the society's next great sensation, and its next major controversy. In 1909, Leadbeater claimed to have discovered a young, impoverished Brahmin boy on the beach near Udyar. The boy's name was Jiddu Krishnamurti. Leadbeater, using his psychic sight, declared that this unassuming boy possessed the most beautiful aura he had ever seen, and that he was destined to be the physical vehicle for the coming world teacher, a great spiritual being known as the Lord Maitreya, whom theosophists believed was the same entity as the Christ and the Lord Buddha. Besant embraced this discovery with all her energy. She legally adopted Krishnamurti and his brother, brought them to England, and began to groom the young boy for his messianic role. A new organization, the Order of the Star in the East, was formed to prepare the world for his arrival. For 2 decades, Krishnamurti was hailed by thousands of theosophists as the coming Messiah. The story, however, took a stunning turn. In 1929, at a large theosophical gathering, Krishnamurti, now a sophisticated and independent young man, stood before his followers and formally dissolved the Order of the Star. In a famous speech, he renounced the role of world teacher, declaring that truth is a pathless land, and that it cannot be approached through any organization, creed, or guru including himself. He broke with the Theosophical Society that had made him famous and embarked on his own, long and distinguished career as a profound and fiercely independent spiritual philosopher. The Krishnamurti affair, while ultimately a failure for the Theosophical Society, had inadvertently launched one of the 20th century's most original spiritual thinkers. Not all of theosophy streams flowed towards the East. One of its most brilliant and creative minds would redirect its current back into the heart of the Western tradition. His name was Rudolf Steiner. Steiner was an Austrian philosopher, a respected scholar of Goethe's scientific writings, and the head of the German section of the Theosophical Society. But he grew increasingly uncomfortable with the Udyar Society's focus on Eastern mysticism and the promotion of Krishnamurti. Steiner believed that the spiritual path for modern Western humanity must be built upon the foundations of Western Culturian Greek philosophy, Christian esotericism, and a scientific, phenomenological approach to the spiritual world. In 1913, he formally broke away from the Theosophical Society and founded his own movement, Anthroposophy, meaning wisdom of the human being. Steiner's Anthroposophy was a monumental intellectual and spiritual achievement. He took the core theosophical concepts of karma, reincarnation, and spiritual evolution, and integrated them with a deep esoteric understanding of Christianity. He developed a host of practical disciplines aimed at a holistic development of the individual. His work would give birth to a stunning array of practical and enduring movements. The Waldorf school system, now a global educational movement, was founded on his principles of child development, which see education as a process of nurturing the soul and spirit as well as the intellect. Biodynamic farming, a forerunner of the modern organic movement, was based on his lectures about working in harmony with the cosmic and terrestrial forces that influence plant life. His ideas also led to new approaches in medicine, art, and architecture, most famously embodied in the unique, organic design of the Gothenum, the international headquarters of the anthroposophical movement in Switzerland. Steiner had taken the theosophical seed and cultivated it into a distinctly European garden. The influence of theosophy extended far beyond the realm of spiritual movements. Its ideas irrigated the fertile ground of the early 20th century artistic avant-garde. For artists who were breaking away from the constraints of realistic representation, theosophy offered a powerful new rationale for their work. It taught that the visible material world was merely a veil, a temporary illusion hiding a deeper, spiritual reality of vibrating energies, geometric forms, and cosmic principles. This idea was a liberation. Art no longer needed to simply copy the outer world. Its true purpose could be to reveal the inner, unseen reality. Vasily Kandinsky, the Russian painter who is often credited as the father of modern abstract art, was a devoted reader of Blavatsky and Steiner. His seminal book, Concerning the Spiritual in Art, is saturated with theosophical ideas about the spiritual power of color, and the mission of the artist to guide humanity towards a new spiritual epoch. His first abstract watercolors were attempts to paint the invisible, to depict the sounds and vibrations of the soul. Piet Mondrian, the Dutch master of geometric abstraction, was a committed, card-carrying member of the Theosophical Society. His famous grid paintings, with their primary colors and black lines, were not mere exercises in design. They were spiritual diagrams, attempts to represent the universal, cosmic harmony, the balance of vertical and horizontal forces, that he believed lay hidden beneath the chaotic surface of appearance. Theosophy had given the pioneers of modern art a metaphysical blueprint for their revolution. And finally, the widest and most diffuse stream flowing from the Theosophical River is the cultural phenomenon we now call the New Age movement. Nearly every core concept of the modern New Age can be traced directly back to the system popularized by Madame Blavatsky. The very idea of ascended masters, spiritual beings who have completed their human evolution and now guide humanity from higher planes is a direct continuation of the Theosophical Mahatmas. Movements like the I Am activity, founded by Guy Ballard in the 1930s, took the idea of the masters and made it a central part of a new American religion. The belief in lost, spiritually advanced civilizations like Atlantis and Lemuria, a staple of New Age thought, was popularized and given its modern form by Blavatsky. The fascination with auras, with chakras, with astral projection, with developing latent psychic powers, all of these were central tenets of the Theosophical curriculum. Even the core belief that all religions are different paths up the same mountain, that they all contain a fragment of a single, universal truth, is the very essence of the Theosophical project. Blavatsky did not invent all of these ideas, many are ancient, but she was the great synthesizer and popularizer. She took them, packaged them, and introduced them into the Western cultural bloodstream, where they have been flowing ever since. The Theosophical Society itself may now be a relatively small and quiet organization, but the river of its ideas has flowed on, branching into 1,000 streams, feeding the roots of modern spirituality in ways so profound that we often fail to even notice it. The woman who claimed to be a messenger for hidden masters had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. Her secret doctrine had become an open secret, shaping the very way the modern world thinks about the soul. And so, at the end of our journey, after tracing the 1,000 streams of her influence, we return to the source. We return to the central, intractable enigma of the entire Theosophical story. We are left with the great, unanswered riddle of the Russian Sphinx, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. After all the investigations have been weighed, after the scandals have been recounted, the schisms analyzed, and the legacies traced, who was she? Was she a divinely inspired messenger? A true servant of the masters of wisdom? Was she a brilliant, cynical, and fantastically accomplished charlatan? Or was the truth, as it so often is, a far more complex and confounding territory, a gray and shadowy landscape between the two extremes? For more than a century, her life and character have been a battleground between her fiercest detractors and her most devoted followers. And the evidence, when examined honestly, provides ammunition for both sides. Let us first consider the case for the prosecution, the argument that she was, as Richard Hodgson so famously concluded, an impostor. The evidence is not trivial. Her famous phenomena, the precipitated letters, the astral bells, the apport objects often occurred under highly controlled and suspect circumstances, frequently within her own home and in her immediate presence. The testimony of the Coulombs, while motivated by revenge and likely embellished, provided a plausible, non-supernatural explanation for many of her most famous miracles, particularly the miraculous shrine at Udyar. The Mahatma letters themselves, the crown jewels of the society's phenomena, are deeply problematic. Handwriting experts, from Hodgson in his time to modern analysts, have consistently found compelling similarities between the scripts of the masters Moria and Kuthumi and Blavatsky's own disguised handwriting. The paper and ink used for the letters were often found to be of common, contemporary manufacture, not some exotic Himalayan origin. And her own life story, the grand myth of her travels, is filled with so many contradictions and impossibilities that it strains credulity. She was a self-confessed weaver of tales, a woman who delighted in mystification and who was not above embellishing a story for dramatic effect. The charge that she was a brilliant con artist, a woman who used her vast knowledge of obscure lore and her powerful personality to perpetrate one of the greatest hoaxes in history, is a serious and well-documented one. It is a verdict that is, for many, impossible to dismiss. And yet, the case for her defense is equally compelling. To dismiss her as a mere charlatan is to create a different kind of riddle, one that is perhaps even harder to solve. If she was a fraud, she was a fraud of superhuman proportions. How did this one woman, with a chaotic and incomplete formal education, produce works like Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine? These are books that, for all their flaws, display a staggering, almost encyclopedic knowledge of comparative religion, ancient philosophy, and obscure mythology. They were written before the age of the internet, before the easy accessibility of great libraries. Where did all this knowledge come from? To say she simply invented it all seems as incredible as her own claim of receiving it from hidden masters. And if her only goal was fame or fortune, she was a spectacular failure. She died in relative poverty, having signed away the lucrative rights to her books to the society. She endured relentless public ridicule, scandal, and ill health for her cause. She worked herself to death, writing for punishingly long hours, day after day, to complete the secret Doctrine, a book from which she would never personally profit. If this was a con, it was a con for which she was willing to be a martyr. Furthermore, her phenomena, while often suspect, were not always so. She was investigated by numerous individuals, including the famed scientist Sir William Crookes, a pioneer in physics and a fellow of the Royal Society. Crookes, an expert in detecting fraud, witnessed phenomena in her presence that he declared he could not explain by any known physical means. To her followers, this is proof that her abilities were genuine, even if she did sometimes supplement them. They argue that she was a spiritual teacher of the highest order, whose personal flaws were irrelevant to the truth of the message she delivered. The true proof, they insist, is not in precipitated teacups or astral bells. It is in the profound and life-altering impact her teachings had on millions of people, providing them with a renewed sense of purpose and a vast, meaningful vision of the cosmos. So where does this leave us? Perhaps the very question, was she real or was she a fraud, is a false dichotomy. Perhaps we are trying to apply a simple binary logic to a personality that was anything but simple. Could it be that she was a genuine, powerful psychic, a woman with real but erratic and undisciplined clairvoyant abilities, who, under the immense pressure to constantly produce proof for a skeptical world, sometimes resorted to conscious or even unconscious trickery to fill in the gaps when her genuine powers failed her? Could it be that the masters were not literal men living in physical bodies in Tibet, but were archetypal intelligences, either from a collective human consciousness or from her own vast, deep subconscious, and that she was a genuine channel for these forces, a true amanuensis for a wisdom that flowed through her, not from her? In this view, she was not a cynical deceiver, but a complex, flawed, and deeply earnest figure, a woman who truly believed in her own mission, even if the means she sometimes used to advance it were questionable. She may have been a weaver of myths, but she was also the first and most devoted believer in the myths she wove. Ultimately, the Sphinx does not give up her riddle. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky remains an enigma, a historical puzzle box that each new generation must attempt to open for itself. But her legacy is not in the unanswerable questions of her character. Her true, undeniable legacy is in the ideas she unleashed upon the world. She took the esoteric, the mystical, the ancient, and she made it modern. She introduced the great Eastern concepts of karma and reincarnation into the Western mind, and in doing so, she irrevocably changed the landscape of modern spirituality. She kicked open a door to a universe of hidden masters, lost continents, and cosmic evolution, and through that door, the entire New Age movement would eventually march. She was a force of nature who defied every convention and challenged every authority. And whether you choose to see her as a saint, a sinner, a charlatan, or a flawed spiritual giant, one fact remains. The world was a very different place after she passed through it, and the questions she raised continue to haunt us to this day. Thank you for exploring this fascinating and complex chapter of spiritual history with us. The story of Theosophy is a powerful reminder that the search for wisdom can lead down strange and contradictory paths, and that the most influential figures are often the most enigmatic. What are your thoughts on Madame Blavatsky? A genuine mystic, a clever imposter, or something else entirely? We would love to read your theories in the comments below. If you enjoy these deep dives into the esoteric currents of the past, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Driftwood Histories for more tales found adrift in time. We are grateful for your support. Until next time, stay curious.